fellow travelers, and welcome to another episode of the Traverse Stars podcast, third season. How my loyal listeners, thank you for your continued support. It's an amazing episode because Christos Gage boards the mothership to discuss Weapon X-Men from Marvel Comics. Now come aboard as we go traversing the stars. Hi, Mr. Gage. Thank you so much for coming to Traverse the Stars podcast.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
It's totally my pleasure. I'm a fan of yours, so it's a big deal for you to come on the show. So thank you so much.
I'm happy to be here.
So I always start out with a question of inspiration. So what inspired your love for comics and who are your earliest influences?
I don't know what inspired my love for comics. I mean, I've been reading them literally as long as I can remember and probably longer. So I don't know. I can't. I mean, seriously, longer than my conscious memory has existed. I wish I could tell you.
So how long since you decided you want to be a comic writer?
As long as I knew it was an actual thing that people did and that the comics didn't just sort of appear on the newsstands magically, I thought, wow, that would be a cool thing to do. I don't know that I ever thought that I would be one until, maybe like in high school when I was like, okay, I guess I'm going to have to get a job someday. So I know that when I was probably about 14 or 15, I submitted a couple of pitches to Marvel on yellow lined paper, handwritten on yellow lined notebook paper. They were basically like issue long fight scenes. And I got a very polite letter back saying, I believe they said, thanks for submitting these. Your work is not yet of professional quality. Keep trying. Probably fair. Remember, I think one of them was basically an X-Men pitch, but really the whole point was for to see what would happen if Juggernaut, who was an unstoppable force, tried to run through the Blob, who was an immovable object. That was kind of awesome. And I can't remember what the other one was.
So did you keep them or not?
Did I keep what?
But the two letters of rejecting you.
I don't know. They might be up in my parents' attic somewhere.
I would say I've kept a few rejection letters somewhere. I haven't got my acceptance letter yet from Marvel DC, but I've got a couple of rejections from different companies. But that's kind of cool though. I don't know if Marvel accepts pitches, cold pitches now. Like something must have been different back then when they used to take that.
I don't think they've accepted them in a very long time. Yeah, very long time. Probably like maybe early 90s. I don't know.
So you went from sending a pitch letter for Juggernaut versus the Blob to now the writer of Weapon X-Men. And I mean, among other things, but the newest recent one is Weapon X-Men from Marvel. So how do you get involved in the project?
Well, I got a email from the editor, Sarah Brunstad, who said, "Hey, would you be interested in doing?" It was actually a package deal. It was like the original X-Men one shot, followed a couple months later by a mini series that was involving a team of X-Men characters from different alternate realities. And it didn't at the time, it wasn't all Wolverines. It could have been any number of things. And we sort of started kicking around ideas and then sort of hit on different Wolverines. And I was like, that sounds really cool. And I think I was busy. I needed to adjust the schedule somehow, but she was, open to it, and it worked out. And it was a lot of fun. I mean, I'm very glad I did it because it's been really, really fun. And got to work with some great artists and Greg Land for the one shot and Yildiray. I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name right, but he's awesome. Yildiray Sanara on the miniseries, and I've just had a terrific time.
Now, over in the World of Wolverine by Benjamin Percy, they're doing Sabretooth War, and like an army of Sabretooths from across. Did that impact at all the Wolverine team, the Ultimate Universe Wolverine teams?
It did not, because one of the things I said is, look, I haven't been able to keep up with the Krakoa stuff, and I do not have the time. I'm working on a couple of video games that I can't really discuss, but I don't have time to get caught up. So if I would love to do this as long as I don't have to tie in with the other stuff that's going on. And she was like, "No, you don't have to." So I was like, "All right, let's do it." So no, it has not impacted.
I mean, that's an interesting point because I would say it does feel like the X-Men have developed a very complex continuity.
Mm-hmm.
How did when you're thinking about your weapon X-Men, is that something you thought about? Is like how easily can a reader just jump in and enjoy the miniseries without having to understand this very complex, very long history that's going on with the Krakatoan storyline right now?
I mean, anytime I write anything, my goal is uh, to make it understandable to someone who's never read like a comic book before, let alone a comic book featuring those characters. But when I first started, literally the first X-Men comic I ever read was issue 107, which had the X-Men, the Starjammers, the Imperial Guard. I mean, there were literally a cast of thousands, and I loved it. And there was enough in there for me to know what was going on. I wanted to know more. And then the second X-Men comic I read was 139. Welcome to the X-Men, Kitty Pryde. Hope you survived the experience. And they had just ended the Dark Phoenix saga, and there was so much going on, repercussions of stuff. But like I knew enough, I could tell enough about what was going on, and then there was its own story going on about Nightcrawler and Wolverine in Canada fighting the Wendigo, and I was like, instead of being like, what the hell is going on? I'm baffled. I don't want any more to do with this. I was like, so much cool stuff is going on that I want to know more. I want to read every X-Men comic that ever existed. And so that's kind of what the approach I tried to take. And then in the back of each issue, I have like a text page where I'm like, okay, if you want to know more about this, here's where all this stuff comes from. But hopefully you can read the story without, all you need to know about Zombie Wolverine is that he's a zombie. He's very, very hungry. And all you need to know about Earth X Wolverine is that he's kind of like old and fat, but if you want to know all the backstory, here's where you can go and find it. So that was kind of my approach.
Now, the premise, from as far as I've understood it, because the issue comes out from the point of this interview in 2 days, the Phoenix collects an army of Logans or Wolverines, however you want to phrase it, Logans or Wolverines, across the great multiverse.
Yes.
So how many Logans are making up this team?
There's 5, and this is a Phoenix from an alternate world. So she's Jean Grey. She's about 50 some years old, about my age, maybe a little bit older, and she's from a world where actually the Phoenix sort of requested permission, like, "Hey, Jean Grey, how'd you like to merge?" And Jean Grey was like, "Well, all right." And so they kind of existed more harmoniously. There was no Dark Phoenix, and they kind of brought peace and harmony to their world. And now she's sort of looking out for threats to the multiverse. And there was one in the form of Onslaught, as we saw in the original X-Men one shot. And that particular world threat was, that threat was stopped, but in the form of destroying that whole world. But Onslaught is sort of off licking his wounds and menacing another world. And so Phoenix has sent the original X-Men back where they came from, because they were only really suitable for that one world, and has now recruited this, I call them Band of Logans, even though one of them is not named Logan. Jane Howlett is a sort of, this is her first appearance, by the way, in issue 1. She is like, what if Wolverine, who was born James Howlett, what if Wolverine was born a girl? And it's also like, what if Wolverine never lost his memory and stayed a wealthy upper class Canadian? So it's almost like Tomb Raider meets Wolverine, in a way. And she's a cool character, and Yildiray designed her beautifully. And anyway, her name's not Logan, but I still call them the Band of Logans because it's like Band of Brothers. It's fun. Anyway, the whole point is these Logans were all assembled from throughout the multiverse, and they've got to go find Onslaught, because Phoenix is a bit concerned, because if she goes and fights Onslaught directly, and Onslaught is able to suck the Phoenix Force out of her, then Onslaught would be completely unstoppable. So the whole idea is the Wolverines go and do the grunt work, and then Phoenix could sort of come in strategically and, deliver the finishing blow. At least that's how it's supposed to work. Doesn't always work out that way, but that's the idea.
Now, for also the people who may not know, I mean, funny thing is, I grew when I grew up when Onslaught series was coming out, I thought that was some of the best time of Marvel. So many great storylines with that huge crossover with also it was fantastic. It's a Magneto and Xavier kind of mental combination. I don't know how you want to like amalgamation.
So the way Onslaught was essentially is the darkest sides of Magneto and the darkest sides of Professor X sort of merged and created a new being made of pure thought, created its own body, and sort of set off on its own agenda. Now, this Onslaught is from a different universe, so it's actually the dark side of Magneto and the dark side of a different Jean Grey. So that's who this Onslaught is, and that's why it could conceivably take the Phoenix Force, because it's a Jean Grey, partially. So yeah, it's the same kind of idea.
So my memory of Onslaught, going back all the way to X-Men, Uncanny X number 322, where he basically punched Juggernaut like halfway across like a continent. I mean, he's a bad dude.
Yeah.
Why are the Wolverines the best team to combat it?
So essentially, in the original X-Men one shot, we saw the original X-Men and the grown-up original X-Men from that world, along with the grown-up Jean Grey, who Onslaught was the darker side of. So what happened in that world is the original X-Men and the original Jean Grey. Onslaught was formed where when Jean Grey, Magneto killed Professor X from that world, and Jean Grey retaliated by shutting down Magneto's mind. But when she did that, the dark side of Magneto's mind and the dark side of her mind formed Onslaught, and Onslaught took over Jean's mind and took over the world with the help of the original X-Men. And it was the whole idea of like, only we can bring peace to the world. But they became like dictators, and the original X-Men were confronted by their younger counterparts and was like, dude, what happened to you? You became lame, And they were like, yeah, you're kind of right. And they fought back, and Onslaught, but then Onslaught, almost killed them. But then Phoenix came in and they basically destroyed that world, and Onslaught was nearly killed, but not quite. And so Onslaught has been like beaten down, but is regaining its power. So this is not a fully powered up Onslaught. So the idea is hopefully to find Onslaught before it's fully powered up and kill it. So we'll see if that works out.
Now, the one character attribute of Wolverine, or the Wolverine that we all know, is that he's a loner. He's not what you call usually, even though he's on a lot of teams, he's not known as a team player. He's the one that kind of is flipping off the Cyclops leader or whoever's in charge and saying, go fuck yourself, I'm going to do what I want to do. Now, this is a team of them together. How well do they function together when they're all sort of rogue loners?
Well, these are all sort of damaged Wolverines. So you've got one who is dead and a zombie. You've got Age of Apocalypse Wolverine, who kind of lives in this dystopian future and has one hand missing. And then you've got Earth X Wolverine, who's old and fat, and his healing factor doesn't work so great anymore. Then you've got Old Man Wolverine, who killed all his friends when he was deceived by Mysterio into thinking they were bad guys. And then you've got Jane Howlett, who is not as damaged as the others, but she's relatively inexperienced for a Wolverine. I mean, she's pretty young, and she has bone claws, and she hasn't been around very long. So they all have sort of, drawbacks. None of them are the best there is at what they do Wolverine thing going on. So yes, they're actually in some ways even more loners and crotchety and as you'd expect, but they also kind of need help. So it's a little weird as to why the Phoenix Force. Because what happened is Phoenix just let the Phoenix Force pick which Wolverines, and there are more than one occasions where she's like, "Why did the Phoenix Force pick these Wolverines?" But that's what it did. So we'll soon we'll hopefully find out.
So will the readers find out why the Phoenix chose these five?
Yes, and because the Phoenix Force, like me, enjoys being entertained. No, I don't. There are there are reasons that will make themselves known.
Now, with the team of Logans or Wolverines, as I mentioned, known to be loners, is there one Wolverine that's kind of risen up to be the team leader?
Initially, it appears that it's going to be Age of Apocalypse Wolverine, but there are moments when each of them will sort of step forward and have their moment.
Now, one interesting that you brought in is the zombie Wolverine. From as one who knows Marvel zombies knows, zombies are not known for doing well around other things, so they want to eat them and they turn them into other zombies. How well does the Marvel zombie Wolverine work in this team? And is it more dangerous to have the Marvel zombie in the world that they put him in than it is the force that they're fighting? Because once again, if he starts chewing on things and makes the Marvel zombie situation all over again on a new planet, that's not a good thing either.
Yeah. So the funny thing is, I wasn't sure how I would like writing Zombie Wolverine, because I was like, oh, it's going to be a little bit one note, isn't it? And then I was like, I had the best time at writing Zombie Wolverine. So one of the first things that happens is Phoenix says, I'm going to use my cosmic power to make sure that you can draw sustenance from just ambient cosmic energy, so you don't have to eat people to survive, Zombie Wolverine. And he's like, okay, but like, I still kind of want to. And, so basically, like, Zombie Wolverine is sort of like me when I'm trying to lose weight, which is like, he's just kind of, he knows he shouldn't, but like, he really wants to. And, everything kind of reminds him of like that he really wants to eat. And he feels like everything is just kind of like, shoving it in his face that he can't eat anything that tastes good. And I just had a blast with him, and I love writing the character. And I just had such a good time, and I hope people enjoy it because it was so much fun. And he's like he's I put up on social media today one panel from the first issue where he I think his line was yo yeah, an alternate world, Jean Grey is saying basically, like, any of you guys can, have the run of the place except the zombie. And he's like, oh my God, it's really depressing when the people who are hated and feared turn around and hate and fear others. And so basically he considers himself like the victim, like being, discriminated against. But he also just kind of wants to eat everybody too. So, I don't know. I just had fun with Zombie Wolverine. I get him.
I mean, that's a fair concern. I mean, if I was one of the other Wolverines, would I be comfortable sleeping at night knowing the zombie Wolverine wants to eat my brains? I'm not sure how comfortable I would be around. I mean, is he a welcome member of the team for the other members, or at some point are they always going to be like, get the hell away? And if you're the villain, how tempting is it during the fight to take a little nibble of who you're trying to fight at that moment?
Well, Onslaught is a being of pure thought, so I don't think Onslaught is terribly worried about it, honestly. So it is an interesting point.
Like I said, I do. I mean, I just enjoy the concept of the team, and because they're once again all Wolverines. As a writer, how do you approach them as distinct characters? And when you're creating the fights, how do you make sure that each character feels unique or having a moment that works towards them in the series?
That's a good question. I mean, I approach the characters by making sure I think about how each of them is different. Even though they're all the same person, and focusing on what makes them, their own person. I mean, one of the earliest things that I learned as a writer is if you can basically plug in another character. Like I remember when I was writing Union Jack miniseries, my editor Andy Schmidt was like, try to focus on what makes Union Jack Union Jack's. Like if you can stick Daredevil into the story and it's the same story, then that's not a good Union Jack story, And I was like, yeah, that's a really good point. And tried to focus on the fact that Union Jack was a blue collar, hero, whereas the previous Union Jack had been like a he wasn't royal, I don't think, but he's like a lord or something, and so I kind of built something around that. So you focus on what makes these Wolverines unique, separate from the other Wolverines, and that's what I focused on. And then in the fight scenes, it was really more about. I mean, it was really more about what's motivating them than. What I mean, and with zombie Wolverines, there's the added thing about like when is he allowed to bite somebody? So yeah, it's hard to go into the fight stuff without spoiling stuff, but yeah, and who they're fighting, like with Onslaught, I mean, they can just kind of go nuts, and it's hard to really hurt Onslaught, but it's hard to. It's yeah, there's too many spoilers. I can't talk too much about the fights, but anyway, I enjoyed it.
I think the interesting thing as well, you talk about motivations. Am I correct that all the Wolverines are fighting for a planet that's not their own?
Correct. Yes.
So
in a way, they know that eventually Onslaught will probably get to their planet, but yeah.
Now, I mean, is it just altruism that's making them fight for another planet, or is there something else going on, or something promised to them? Like, what makes them want to or care enough to take part in this dangerous mission? I mean, it's Onslaught.
I would say that for Jane, it's just like a sense of adventure. She's young and excited and feeling her oats, so to speak. With the others, they've all sort of fucked up badly in some way or another, and they've got something to. They're on some kind of path of redemption.
Now, one of the interesting additions is like says Old Man Logan, who, for those who don't know, is as you said, is a much older Wolverine, much older Logan. Other than Jane, the other three can see aspects of themselves in what Logan is, Old Man Logan is, and what could be for them in the future.
Mm-hmm.
How much does he exist almost as a warning to the others that you could turn into me? How much is he there as a model of what they could be or maybe shouldn't be?
I think, and this is human nature. I think we all look at an older person who has, shall we say, not become something we would want to become, and it's easy to say, well, that's not going to be me, and it can easily could be. So yeah, I think in a lot of ways the other Wolverines, I mean, some of them are like, I mean, you look at Age of Apocalypse Wolverine, I mean, in the Age of Apocalypse, that world's about to get nuked into a pile of ashes. So none of them really, and then Earth X Wolverine, his wife walked out on him and he's old and fat. And, none of them are exactly in a position to be like, and the funny thing about Jane is, she's from the early 1900s and is a upper class Canadian young woman. And, her job was to marry an upper class Canadian young man. And, she gets to be among all these male counterparts of herself, and they're all hung up on some woman or another, whether it be Jean Grey or, Marco or somebody. And she's like, good Lord, what's wrong with you guys? You don't have to be with anybody. I've spent my whole life trying not to get married. And, anyway, so I think all of them are sort of like looking at each other like there's a cautionary tale that I don't want to be.
Well, I mean, you also something kind of interesting too is that once again, the worlds they're coming from are not exactly happy.
Mm-hmm.
How badly would they even want to return home?
Well, that's an excellent point. And are they necessarily going to return home when it's over if they survive? So who knows?
So I know this is a 4-issue miniseries, but is this a 4-issue miniseries with a chance to be more than that? Is it a 4-issue miniseries wrapped up on its own? I mean, once again, the idea of the team of Wolverines is pretty cool. So out of that this could become a thing, and we're gonna enjoy more of this if the sales do well enough.
Yeah, I mean, look, if sales do well enough, anything could come back. I would love to do more with some or all of these characters. I would be thrilled to do a zombie Wolverine and Earth X Wolverine buddy comedy. Um, yeah, and I mean, whatever people like, I'm up for it.
So the first issue comes out Wednesday, the
Yes.
6th, March 6th.
Hmm.
And I assume it's every month after.
I think 1 month it double ships.
Oh, okay. Cool. What is next for you after that?
Gosh, uh, like I said, I'm working on 2 video games. So the stuff I've been doing in comics has mostly been short stuff. I did a 10 pager for Blood Hunters. It's a 10 page story in which Manwolf, who is John Jameson, is going out for lunch with his father, J. Jonah Jameson, when the vampire apocalypse strikes New York, and they have to deal with it while father son drama is rearing its head. And What else? What else has been announced? I did another 10 pager that I don't think has been announced. I just got the last page of art in today. That's really cool. Reunites me with Greg Land, which I've enjoyed. Uh, what else? What else? I'm sure there's more stuff, but I can't think of it.
So, hopefully you come back especially when you get to talk about the video games. Gonna be able to come back and talk about it.
Yeah, I don't know when I'm going to be able to. Video games have a long lead time, so I don't know when, but we'll see.
Well, Mr. Gage, it was an absolute pleasure to talk with you, sir, and I look forward to reading Weapon X-Men. I think it sounds awesome. And thank you so much for doing this for me.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Good night, sir.
You too.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Adversing Stars podcast. Please help me battle those algorithms by liking and subscribing. Be sure to return for the next episode when we are visited by Carissa Grant.